I want you to put yourself in a very specific, very miserable set of shoes for a minute.
Oh boy. Okay.
Imagine you are an exhausted, like probably scurvy-ridden 18th century sailor.
Sounds awful already.
Right. You have drawn the night watch. You are standing on the deck of this rolling wooden ship in the freezing, absolutely pitch-black waters of the North Atlantic.
Just totally isolated out there.
Exactly. You are leaning over the rail, staring out into an endless void, when the surface of the water below you, it just begins to change.
Oh, man.
Yeah, it bubbles, it starts to churn, and then, incredibly slowly, this enormous, tangled mass rises out of the freezing depths.
I can literally picture it.
And in the faint moonlight, it does not even look like an animal. It looks like a submerged, writhing forest, completely covered in seaweed.
Which is terrifying.
You, my friend, have just encountered the Kraken.
It really represents the ultimate maritime nightmare, Just trying to process the sheer scale of that image, a creature so immense it breaks the surface, resembling a newly formed landmass rather than, like, a living organism.
Yeah, a landmass.
Right. It would be enough to completely shatter the reality of even the most hardened mariner of that era.
And today, we are throwing ourselves completely into that nightmare. We are taking a massive stack of sources, historical sailor accounts, the psychology of maritime isolation, Renaissance cartography, and cutting-edge deep-sea biology.
It is a really huge stack of material.
It is, and we are using it to dissect the legend of the Kraken.
Okay, let's unpack this. How do the terrifying legends of these monsters stack up against the real-life giant and colossal squids?
That is the big question.
Right, like which parts of those panicked sailor accounts were wildly exaggerated and which parts were terrifyingly true?
And there is a lot of truth hidden in there.
Yes, and maybe the most fascinating question of all, why did the human mind need to conjure up these specific island-sized monsters in the first place? The transition from pure maritime terror to actual scientific awe is just a remarkable journey.
It really is.
And for you listening, this remains incredibly relevant today. I mean, we live in an era where we feel we have absolutely everything mapped, right? Pinpointed and categorized right on our smartphone.
Oh, absolutely. We think we know everything.
But the ocean remains our planet's ultimate wilderness. This deep dive is fundamentally an exploration of how humans process the terrifying unknown. When confronted with an environment that is vast, dark, and completely indifferent to human survival, well, our brains are forced to construct a narrative to cope with that vulnerability.
So I want to start by figuring out our baseline. Like when I was looking through the source material, I was blown away by how specific the old descriptions of the Kraken were.
Yeah, they were very detailed.
They really were. They did not just say, oh, big squid. They described phenomena. They described islands.
Yeah.
Where are the earliest detailed accounts of this thing coming from?
Well, to find the formalized descriptions, we really have to look toward Scandinavia.
Okay, Scandinavia.
Yeah. A key text emerges in the mid-18th century, specifically 1751, written by a Danish theologian and naturalist named Bishop Erik Pontoppidan.
Right, Pontoppidan.
He published this massive volume called The Natural History of Norway. And the thing is, he did not consider himself a writer of folklore.
Wait, really? He thought this was science.
Exactly. He presented this as a serious encyclopedic documentation of the region's flora, fauna, and geography.
That is wild. I was reading his description of the Kraken, and it is genuinely insane. He claims the creature is literally, quote, miles in circumference.
Miles.
Yeah. He describes it appearing at the surface looking like a cluster of small islands, completely surrounded by floating seaweed.
Which matches that visual of a submerged forest you mentioned earlier.
Totally. It is so massive that, supposedly, fishermen would deliberately row their boats out toward it.
Which sounds like a terrible idea.
Right. Why would you do that? But the sources say because this giant mass rising from the deep would drive entire schools of fish up toward the surface, making for an easy catch.
Oh, wow. Okay, that makes sense economically.
But the catch was, if you did not row away before the creature decided to descend well, it would engulf you.
Naturally.
When it sank back down, it supposedly created whirlpools so massive they could drag the largest, heaviest wooden galleons straight down into the abyss.
That imagery of the whirlpool is crucial, and it actually builds upon much older Norse traditions.
Really? Older than the 18th century?
Oh, absolutely. Long before Pontoppidan, you can look at the 13th century Icelandic texts, specifically the Urvar Odr saga.
Okay, yeah, I saw that in the notes.
In that saga, there is a description of a beast known as the Hafgufa.
Yes, the Hafgufa. But The feeding mechanism described in that saga totally confused me. It supposedly feeds by belching. How does that even work?
It is so gross, but fascinating. The lore surrounding the Hafgufa states that it is unimaginably massive, so large that it simply stays stationary at the ocean surface for an entire tide cycle.
Just floating there.
Right. And rather than hunting actively, it uses this bizarre strategy. It belches up partially digested food, which creates a massive, nutrient-rich slick on the surface of the water.
Oh, ew. Okay.
It is gross, but it attracts massive schools of fish, which just rush directly into the creature's open, cavernous mouth to feed.
It is like a giant trap.
Exactly. Once the mouth is full, the Hafgufa simply snaps its jaws shut, swallowing thousands of fish in one massive gulp.
That is horrifying.
The saga even features this terrifying narrative where sailors navigate their ship between two massive jutting rocks rising out of the sea.
Do not tell me those were not rocks.
They were not rocks. They realized hours later that they had sailed directly through the open jaws of the beast.
Islands with tentacles, jaws the size of fjords, feeding by vomiting. I mean, it is a lot to take in, but obviously there are real animals at the core of this.
There absolutely are.
Well, let's bring in the biology and do a reality check here. When we strip away the 18th century panic, what parts of these old accounts hold up to modern science?
Separating the biological facts from maritime fiction really reveals some surprising truths. Let's look at what is genuinely factual based on those terrifying old accounts.
Okay, lay it on me.
First and foremost, giant squids exist.
Confirmed.
That is confirmed zoological fact. Furthermore, the accounts of rare encounters near the surface of the ocean are also grounded in truth.
But they do not live the surface, right?
No, they do not. We now understand that when a giant squid is seen at the surface, it is almost always a sick, dying, or already dead animal that has lost its ability to regulate its depth.
Oh, so it just floats up.
Right. It gets pushed up from the abyss.
Which totally explains the behavior the sailors noted. They described these things as sluggish, floating islands that just sat there. They weren't casually sunbathing. Their biology was
Oh, precisely. It was a dying animal. Another factual element is the incredible lethality and reach of their tentacles.
So they can actually grab things.
Oh, they are absolutely capable of violently grabbing massive prey. We have undeniable physical evidence of this in the form of massive circular sucker scars left on the skin of sperm whales.
We will definitely get into those whale battles later because that is wild.
It really is. And finally, the sheer shock value recorded in the historical texts is completely valid.
I mean, I would be shocked.
Finding an invertebrate the length of a school bus floating in the water would absolutely shatter the worldview of a 17th century sailor. I mean, their understanding of biology was mostly limited to coastal fish and, barnyard livestock.
But the scale has to be exaggerated, right?
Yeah.
Because a school bus is huge, but it is definitely not miles in circumference or capable of creating a whirlpool that sinks a warship.
No, definitely not. That brings us to the unequivocal exaggerations. First, pulling down entire ships. Giant squids simply lack the mass, the leverage, and the structural integrity to drag down a heavy, wind-powered wooden galleon.
They would just rip their own arms off trying to pull a boat.
Exactly. Second, the size. The absolute maximum length for a giant squid is estimated to be around 12 to 13 meters.
So roughly 40 feet.
Right, 40 feet. That is a massive animal, but it is not an island.
No.
And third, the concept of intentional malicious hunting of humans. These are highly specialized deep-sea creatures.
So they do not care about us.
Not at all. Any encounter with a human vessel at the surface was almost certainly accidental, or a desperate defensive reaction from a dying animal, not some calculated predatory strike. They aren't lurking in the shallows plotting against fishermen.
I was so fascinated to learn that when we talk about the Kraken today, we aren't just talking about one animal. There are two distinct, massive, deep-sea contenders in the ocean that likely fueled these centuries of myth.
Yes, there are two main suspects.
We have a giant squid and we have a colossal squid.
Yeah.
Walk me through the differences because they sound like entirely different alien species.
They are different species, and they represent two incredibly different evolutionary strategies for dominating the hostile environment of the deep ocean. Let's look at Architeuthis dux, the giant squid.
Okay.
This is an animal optimized for reach and speed. As we noted, it can grow up to 13 meters long, but it's crucial to understand its anatomy. The vast majority of that length is not the main body, or the mantle.
And what exactly do we mean by the mantle, just so we have a clear picture?
Oh, sure. The mantle is the main muscular torpedo-shaped body of the squid. It houses all the internal organs, the hearts, the gills, the stomach.
Okay, got it.
In a giant squid, the mantle itself might only be 2 or 3 meters long, but extending from that body are 8 arms, and then those 2 extraordinarily long feeding tentacles, which can stretch out to 10 meters.
So they use those 2 massive tentacles like bungee cords to just shoot out into the dark and snatch prey from a distance.
Exactly. It is a long-range weapon. Now, compare that architecture to Mesonychoteuthis hamiltoni, the colossal squid.
The colossal.
The colossal squid is optimized for sheer, brutal power. Its habitat is the freezing, harsh environment of the Southern Ocean, down in the abyssal depths around Antarctica.
So it is way down south.
Right. It is generally shorter in overall length than the giant squid, maybe reaching 10 to 14 feet in mantle length, but it is significantly, terrifyingly heavier.
How heavy are we talking?
We are talking about an animal that can weigh up to 495 kilograms, nearly half a ton.
Wow. The heavyweight champion. Short, thick, and incredibly dense.
And its weaponry is entirely different, too. While the giant squid has suckers lined with small serrated rings of chitin.
Which is like bug shell material, right?
Yes, the same hard material that makes up insect exoskeletons. While unlike that, the colossal squid's tentacles are armed with actual swiveling hooks. Swiveling hooks. It uses these sharp hooks to dig deeply into large prey like Patagonian toothfish and just hold on tenaciously in near total darkness.
The biology of these animals is honestly stranger than the myths. Like, when I was reading about how they actually survived 2 miles deep, my mind was blown.
It is an alien world down there.
Seriously. For instance, to survive in the pitch black, they have evolved the largest eyes in the entire animal kingdom. We're talking eyes the size of large dinner plates, almost 30 centimeters across. How does an eye that big even function?
It is a remarkable evolutionary adaptation. Down in the bathypelagic and abyssopelagic zones of the ocean, the midnight zone's sunlight absolutely does not penetrate.
Total darkness.
Right. So those massive eyes did not evolve to see color or fine detail like ours do. They are essentially highly sensitive light-gathering dishes.
Oh, to catch any tiny bit of light.
Exactly. They evolved to detect the faintest glowing flashes of bioluminescence from other deep-sea creatures. More importantly, those massive lenses can spot the massive shadow of a diving sperm whale momentarily blocking out the microscopic glowing organisms in the water above.
That is so cool. And then there's the buoyancy problem. I never really thought about this, but most fish have swim bladders, right? Little internal balloons they fill with gas so they do not sink to the bottom.
Yes, very common in shellfish.
But if you live thousands of feet deep, the water pressure is so intense it would crush a gas balloon to the size of a pea. So how does a half-ton squid float?
Well, a gas bladder is physically impossible at those depths, so giant and colossal squids rely on a completely different chemical system. They maintain neutral buoyancy by filling their muscle tissues with a solution of ammonium chloride.
Ammonia, like the cleaning stuff.
Very similar, yes. Ammonium chloride is lighter than the surrounding seawater. This internal chemical bath allows them to achieve neutral buoyancy, meaning they can simply hover motionless in the dark water column without expending a single calorie of energy to swim upward.
Okay, to put that in perspective for everyone listening, imagine a massive piece of salty, rotten black licorice hovering in the dark.
That is a very vivid way to put it, but accurate.
That is essentially what a giant squid is. Because their flesh is saturated with ammonia, they taste absolutely horrific. It smells like window cleaner. Which is incredibly lucky for them because it's the exact reason humans have never commercially fished them for food.
Right. It is an incredibly efficient survival mechanism, even if it tastes terrible to us. In an environment where food is extraordinarily scarce, conserving energy is paramount.
You do not want to swim if you do not have to.
Precisely. Hovering chemically rather than swimming mechanically saves massive amounts of energy. And this brings us to another fascinating biological phenomenon we see in these creatures, abyssal gigantism.
I really want you to unpack that concept for me. Why do things get so unbelievably huge down in the dark?
Abyssal gigantism, which is sometimes related to a concept called Bergmann's rule, is an evolutionary tendency where deep-sea animals grow substantially larger than their shallow water relatives.
Like those giant crabs.
Yes, the Japanese spider crab, or the giant isopod. The mechanism behind this is complex, but it fundamentally relies on temperature and pressure. In the freezing cold environment of the deep ocean, an animal's metabolic rate slows down drastically.
Everything just moves slower.
Furthermore, cold water can hold significantly more dissolved oxygen than warm water. This combination of high oxygen availability, extreme pressure, and delayed sexual maturity allows cells to grow larger and animals to accumulate massive biomass over their lifespan.
But wait, how does that work for the squid?
Well, that is the bizarre twist with giant squids. Despite this massive size, they live life at an incredibly accelerated pace. They grow from microscopic larvae to titanic 40-foot predators very quickly and then die in just 4 to 6 years.
Wait, hold on. Let me stop you there, because that does not make sense to me.
Oh, so?
If they only live a few years, and they are essentially 40-foot-long, ammonia-filled, soft bodies that mostly stay 3,000 feet deep in the ocean, how do we bridge the gap?
Bridge the gap to the myth, you mean?
Yeah. How do sailors come back to port claiming they saw island-sized monsters dragging down galleons? Were they just flat out lying to get a good story out of it?
That is the essential question. And no, the historical consensus is not that they were lying. The physical evidence of the animal alone cannot explain the sheer scale of the mythology.
Okay, so what does?
To truly understand the Kraken, we have to transition away from marine biology and step into human psychology. We have to examine what happens to the human brain under extreme maritime conditions.
So if these exhausted sailors are hallucinating squids as island-sized sea monsters, how does that happen? Walk me through the psychology of the abyss.
There is a fundamental rule in human psychology, especially regarding trauma and the unknown. If you cannot explain something terrifying, you turn it into a monster.
Wow, yeah.
The ocean, to an early mariner, was not just a workplace. It was a hostile, unpredictable, and infinite void. A sudden squall, an uncharted reef, or a rogue wave could obliterate an entire crew in minutes without any warning or reason.
And no one would ever know what happened.
Exactly. That kind of random, meaningless chaos is psychologically unbearable for the human brain.
It's like our brains desperately need a reason for the bad things that happen. So inventing a monster gives the chaos a face.
Precisely. Naming a threat makes it manageable. It provides a narrative framework. An ocean storm is just physics and bad luck. But a monster has motives.
Right, monster can be fought.
Yes. A monster has behaviors. A monster can be watched out for or appeased or avoided. It turns an indifferent, lethal ocean into a story. In that historical context, storytelling was a literal survival mechanism.
That makes so much sense.
It was a way for mariners to encode warnings and share critical navigational knowledge, masking survival data under the guise of myth.
To really understand why they saw what they saw, we have to put ourselves on that deck. I was reading about the specific conditions these guys were living under, and it is a perfect recipe for madness.
Applying Norman Zinberg's drug, set, and setting model, which was actually originally developed to understand psychedelic experiences, is incredibly illuminating when analyzing these historical sailor accounts.
Psychedelic research applied to sailors. I love this.
It fits perfectly. Let's start with the setting. The physical environment itself. Imagine the vast, featureless ocean. The sailors on night watch. The only illumination is the faint, flickering glow of a whale oil lantern or the sliver of a moon.
Just totally dark.
The open sea acts as a massive distortion engine.
A distortion engine. Because out on the open ocean, there are no trees, no buildings, no roads. There is absolutely zero visual reference to give your brain a sense of scale.
Exactly. Our brains calculate size and distance by comparing objects to known reference points. Without those reference points, your brain loses its ability to accurately judge geometry.
Your brain just guesses.
Right. So if a sick 30-foot giant squid breaches the surface 50 yards away in the moonlight, thrashing its tentacles violently as it dies, your brain is receiving very confusing visual data.
I can only imagine.
In the dark, filtered through fear, that 30-foot animal easily becomes a 100-foot behemoth in your mind because the brain scales it up to match the terror you feel.
And then we have to look at the mental state of the sailors. These guys were not well-rested athletes operating at peak cognitive performance.
Definitely not.
They were dealing with chronic, unrelenting stress. They faced the constant threat of death. They endured severe sleep deprivation from rolling 4-hour shift watches.
The exhaustion must have been profound.
And crucially, they suffered from profound nutritional deficits. Scurvy, which is a severe lack of vitamin C, does not just make your teeth fall out. We know it causes profound neurological issues, paranoia, and mood swings.
Yes, the physiological toll was immense.
Plus, they were steeped in deep-seated maritime superstitions from the moment they stepped on board. They believed in omens.
They stepped onto the ship expecting to see monsters, which neurologically primed their brains to find them in the shadows. And then we add the final critical layer of the Zinberg model substances.
Oh man. The historical reality of shipboard life is that it's basically fueled by a constant stream of substances.
It really was.
Fresh water spoiled incredibly quickly in wooden casks, turning slimy and dangerous. So, navies and merchant fleets issued daily rations of alcohol to keep the men hydrated. We are talking rum, gin, small beer.
They were constantly mildly intoxicated.
All the time. Add to that the widespread heavy use of strong tobacco and, in many cases, opium.
Opium was standard issue.
Yeah, opium was a standard ship's medicine, a cure-all used for everything from seasickness and coughing to severe dysentery.
So you have a crew of exhausted, malnourished, neurologically compromised individuals who are heavily intoxicated, staring out into a terrifying, sensory-deprived, dark environment.
It is the absolute perfect recipe for severe pareidolia and vivid hallucinations.
Pareidolia, yes.
That's the psychological phenomenon where your brain tries to force meaningful patterns onto random shapes, right? Like looking at the clouds and seeing a face, or seeing a dog in the shadows of your bedroom.
Yes, pareidolia. The brain hates ambiguity. A classic maritime example of this is the mermaid myth. Marine biologists and historians now widely agree that many early mermaid sightings were actually encounters with marine mammals, specifically manatees and dugongs.
Manatees? Really?
Yes, these animals have skeletal structures in their front flippers that somewhat resemble 5 fingers, and they have neck vertebrae that allow them to turn their heads in ways that mimic human movement.
Oh, that is so weird to think about.
To a lonely, malnourished, intoxicated sailor looking through a spyglass, a manatee bobbing in the water easily triggers pareidolia. The brain simply fills in the visual gaps to see a mermaid.
Okay, I can totally buy a guy mistaking a manatee for a mermaid after a pint of rum, but a giant squid is still only 40 feet long.
Oh.
How do you hallucinate an animal turning into a landmass? How does it be a miles in circumference?
For that scale of distortion, we have to look away from biology and look at a mind-blowing meteorological reality called the Fata Morgana.
Yes, I was hoping we'd get to this because the physics behind this are insane.
A Fata Morgana is a complex superior mirage. It is an optical illusion, but a physical one, not a psychological one.
It is actually happening in the air.
Exactly. It happens under very specific atmospheric conditions, usually a thermal inversion. Normally, air gets colder the higher you go, but in a thermal inversion, a layer of significantly warmer air rests on top of a dense layer of very cold air sitting right on the ocean surface.
So you have a cold blanket of air trapped under a hot ceiling of air. How does that bend light?
Light travels faster through warm, less dense air than it does through cold, dense air.
Okay, tracking.
When light from a distant object, say a small rock or a piece of driftwood, travels toward the sailor, it hits that boundary between the cold and warm air. Because the light speeds up in the warm air, the light rays physically bend downwards toward the observer's eye.
So it acts like a giant atmospheric funhouse mirror.
More than just a mirror. The Fata Morgana stacks inverted and upright images on top of each other, alternating compressed and stretched zones of light.
What does that actually look like to the sailor?
What this means in practical terms is that this atmospheric phenomenon can take a very ordinary object, a distant small rock, a dead whale floating on the surface, or even a small boat, and optically stretch it upwards and outwards.
Wow.
It makes the object look like a massive, jagged floating castle or an impossibly towering wall of water.
And it is not static, right? The descriptions say the mirage shimmers and shifts constantly with the temperature gradients, making the castle or the wall look like it is undulating and alive.
Precisely. If we look back at the 13th century King's Mirror manuscript from Norway, it describes a terrifying phenomenon called Hafgirdingar, which translates to sea hedges.
Sea hedges? That sounds ominous.
The text describes a sudden, horrifying wall of waves that looks like steep, overhanging cliffs completely surrounding a ship, ready to crush it.
Like a massive tsunami just hovering there.
For centuries, historians thought this was a myth or an exaggerated tidal wave. But modern meteorologists and physicists have shown this is a perfectly accurate description of a Fata Morgana mirage occurring in the frigid polar regions. The sailors were seeing the distant horizon optically folded upward into a wall.
So let me pull all of these mechanics together to see the whole picture.
Go for it.
You take a sailor who is completely exhausted, terrified, and suffering from the neurological impacts of scurvy. You give him his daily ration of rum. You put him on the deck of a rolling ship in the pitch dark, where there are 0 visual reference points for scale.
Setting the stage.
Then a thermal inversion creates a fata morgana, an atmospheric optical illusion that stretches light so a floating log looks like a towering, shifting castle.
Right.
And then right in the middle of that shimmering optical distortion, a dying 40-foot giant squid covered in thrashing tentacles and dinner plate eyes breaches the surface.
It is the absolute perfect storm. It is biology, physics, and psychology colliding in the dark.
Honestly, looking at it that way, no wonder we got the Kraken. It would be weirder if they did not invent a monster after seeing all of that.
The sensory input they received was entirely real. There was a squid, there was a distortion of light, there was the dark ocean.
It was real data.
Yes. It was their brain's interpretation of that complex input, filtered through immense fear, physical exhaustion, and cultural superstition that created the myth of the Kraken.
Which brings us to this incredible pivot point in the historical record. Because these hallucinated, terrifying stories did not just stay as dockside rumors whispered over tankards of ale in port cities.
No, they spread much further.
They were written down. They were codified by the most educated, elite members of society at the time. They were drawn directly onto maps. And those maps went on to shape global politics and culture. How does a hallucination end up dictating naval navigation?
This is a vital part of the story. We have to understand that maps in the medieval and Renaissance periods were not just the neutral navigational tools we think of today.
They were not just Google Maps for ships.
Not at all. They were visual encyclopedias, massive political statements, theological treatises, and fine art pieces all rolled into one document.
And there wasn't just one type of map.
Right.
If you were actually steering a ship, you weren't looking at a map covered in Sea Dragon.
Correct. We must distinguish between the maps made for the elite and the maps made for the people actually risking their lives on the ships. Let's contrast the Mappa Mundi with the Portland chart.
Okay, what is the Mappa Mundi?
A Mappa Mundi, or decorative world map, was designed for wealthy patrons, kings, the Pope, and noblemen. These were massive, highly embellished artworks, often drawn on expensive vellum.
So they were status symbols.
Exactly. They were full of fantasy, religious symbolism, and of course monstrous sea creatures. Their primary function was not to get a ship from point A to point B. It was to entertain, to show off the patron's immense wealth, and to assert a specific theological worldview.
It was wealthy elites flexing their status. Like, look at my massive map showing how dangerous the world is outside my castle.
Essentially, yes. It was a display of cosmic order. But then you have the Portoland charts.
The ones the sailors used.
Right. These were the working maps used by actual mariners on the decks of ships. They were characterized by rhumb lines, these tight networks of straight lines crisscrossing the sea to aid a navigator in plotting compass bearings.
So pure utility.
Portoland charts were pure, no-nonsense mathematics and navigation. They were largely devoid of monsters or decorations. If a monster was drawn on a Portoland chart, it wasn't for artistic flair. It was a highly practical warning, perhaps marking the exact location of a ship-breaking reef or a treacherous, very real whirlpool.
So when cartographers spent months drawing intricate, terrifying monsters on those big decorative maps, what were they actually trying to achieve?
The monsters on those decorative maps served three main functions. First, marking unknown waters, the classic, here be dragons or here be monsters.
The edges of the known world.
Yes. This visually indicated the limits of human geographic knowledge. Second, as we noted, serving as general warnings for physical dangers in the water. But third, and most interestingly for our deep dive, there were exercises in political and cultural imagination.
They were a form of state propaganda.
Exactly.
And the absolute masterpiece of this cartographic propaganda is Olaus Magnus's Carta Marina, which was published in 1539. Let's really zoom in on this map because the story behind it is fascinating.
The Carta Marina is a monumental achievement in cartography. It's a massive, highly detailed map of Northern Europe covering Scandinavia, Iceland, and the Baltic Sea.
Okay, so up north.
Yes, and the context of its creator is crucial. Olaus Magnus was a Swedish Catholic clergyman, but by 1539, Sweden had undergone the Protestant Reformation. Magnus refused to convert, so he was exiled from his homeland and ended up living in Venice.
So he is sitting in Venice, which is the absolute hub of Renaissance art, wealth, and maritime power. And he is a refugee trying to make people care about his frozen homeland.
Precisely. He spent 12 years carving the woodblocks for this map.
12 years.
He desperately wanted to elevate the prestige of Northern Europe in the eyes of the Venetian elites and the Pope. He wanted to prove that the North was not just a frozen, barbaric wasteland at the edge of the world, but a place of divine order, incredible natural marvels, and immense geopolitical importance that the Catholic Church should care about fighting for.
So he had an agenda.
A huge agenda. And to achieve that visual impact, he filled the oceans of his map with some of the most vibrant, terrifying, and biologically detailed sea monsters ever drawn.
I want to look at 3 specific monsters from the Carta Marina because they show exactly how Magnus was blending mythology, classical literature, and actual biology to make a point. First, we have the sea serpent.
The sea serpent on the Carta Marina is depicted vividly as a massive 200-foot-long scaled beast wrapped completely around a wooden ship, literally snatching screaming sailors right off the deck in its jaws.
Just a total nightmare image.
It is drawn with flaming red eyes. This creature is pulled directly from Norse myth specifically. It invokes Jörmungandr, the legendary Midgard serpent.
The serpent from Norse mythology circles the entire world, bites its own tail, and its release brings about the apocalypse.
Exactly the reference he was making. In Magnus's accompanying text for the map, he explicitly states that the appearance of this sea serpent off the coast portends the death of princes and the outbreak of violent war.
Oh, wow. So it is a political warning.
Very much so. So the monster drawn here isn't just a biological threat to shipping. It is a profound symbol of political upheaval. It visually represents the fear of regime change, the chaos of the Reformation, and societal collapse.
That is fascinating. So the serpent is the mythological, political angle. Then he has a monster representing the classical literary tradition. He draws Charybdis.
Yes. Placed strategically among the treacherous Lofoten Islands off the coast of Norway, Magnus draws a massive, horrifying whirlpool, sucking a ship down into a bottomless, spiraling abyss.
Sounds like the old Kraken myths.
It does, and the text directly next to it reads, Hic es horrenda Charybdis. Here is the horrible Charybdis. This is a direct, undeniable reference to Homer's Odyssey and ancient Greek mythology.
He is borrowing a monster from the Greeks to make the North look epic to the Italians.
It was a brilliant cultural move. By placing a foundational classical Greek monster in the Norwegian Sea, Magnus is elevating the cultural status of the North to match that of the Mediterranean.
Smart marketing.
Very. But symbolically, Charybdis represents something else. It represents the raw, overwhelming mechanical power of the sea. It visually demonstrates a force of nature against which human industry, technology, and the skill of the pilot are completely and utterly useless.
It's the ocean saying, I don't care how good your boat is, I win.
Exactly.
But then we have my absolute favorite one on the map, the sea unicorn. Because this one represents a massive shift toward actual empirical natural observation.
The sea unicorn is drawn as a robust creature with a horse-like head and a massive, straight, spiraled horn protruding from its forehead.
Which sounds completely made up.
But most historical scholars agree this is one of the earliest printed depictions of a real animal. The narwhal filter through the intense Renaissance obsession with the mythological unicorn.
And what's so cool is how Magnus describes its behavior. He says it is powerful enough to pierce and completely wreck ships with its horn. But, and here is the key detail, he notes, that it is very slow-moving.
Slow-moving, yes.
Because it is slow, he writes that if a sailor is smart, observant, and skilled, they can outmaneuver the beast and escape with their lives.
That is a crucial philosophical distinction in the history of science.
How so?
Well, the sea serpent and Charybdis represent unstoppable divine doom, but the sea unicorn represents a hazard that can be mitigated through human wit, observation, and skill.
Oh, I see.
It perfectly symbolizes a growing Renaissance belief that mankind, through the pursuit of knowledge and careful observation, could navigate, understand, and eventually coexist with the wild forces of nature.
I love that progression.
Yeah.
But here's the thing that stands out to me. Magnus and these other cartographers weren't putting monsters on maps to scare people away from the ocean. They weren't saying, hey, don't go here.
No, not at all.
They were putting them there as a feature. They wanted to prove the ocean was bursting with life, bursting with mystery. They were inviting awe. They wanted the Venetian elites to look at the map and say, wow, the North is incredibly vibrant. Not just the North is terrifying.
That captures the essence of Renaissance cartography beautifully. The monsters were a form of regional branding. They made the map, and by extension, the entire region it depicted, captivating and valuable.
But eventually reality catches up, right?
Yes. As the centuries rolled on, this reliance on myth and cartographic imagination began to face a serious, undeniable challenge. The physical, biological evidence of the ocean's true inhabitants was starting to wash ashore.
You can only draw a sea serpent for so long before a biologist asks to see the bones. Let's look at how the myth finally cracked. How does a dockside rumor become accepted scientific fact?
Well, for centuries, storytellers and mapmakers completely controlled the narrative of the Kraken. But the ocean, while vast, is not infinite, and eventually the massive things living in it ended up interacting with global human enterprise.
They ran into us.
Yes. The most undeniable proof did not come from scientists. It started surfacing via the brutal global expansion of the whaling industry.
Because whalers were basically acting as massive floating autopsy tables. They were cutting open the ocean's top predators and looking inside.
Precisely. The sperm whale is the primary apex predator of giant and colossal squids. When 18th and 19th century whalers processed these massive marine mammals for their oil, they repeatedly found something bizarre and unexplainable in the whales' massive stomachs. Thousands of huge, incredibly tough, chitinous beaks.
For those trying to picture this, they look exactly like parrot beaks, but massive and sharp enough to sever bone.
Yes. The beak is the feeding mechanism of the squid, and it is made of densely packed chitin, making it the hardest, most indigestible part of the squid's body.
So it just sits in the stomach.
Finding these beaks in such huge, concentrated quantities proved undeniably that there was a massive population of enormous cephalopods living in the deep ocean, serving as the primary biological food source for sperm whales. And then there was the external evidence. Whalers observed that almost all mature sperm whales were covered in massive circular sucker scars, some measuring several inches across, carved deep into their thick skin.
Which paints this incredible, violent picture of what is happening 2 miles down in the pitch black. You have a 60-foot, 60-ton sperm whale diving into the freezing abyss to do battle with a 40-foot giant squid.
It is an ongoing evolutionary arms race happening in total darkness. The whale almost always wins, given its immense bulk, its powerful jaws, and its sophisticated echolocation capabilities.
But the squid does not go down easy.
No, the squid fights back violently, wrapping its tentacles around the whale's head and leaving those permanent circular scars as proof of the struggle.
So, science had the beaks, and they had the scars. But the late 19th century is when the dam breaks. We finally start getting our hands on the actual intact animals. There are 2 incredible historical moments I found in the sources. The first happens in 1861, involving a French ship. Walk me through that.
The event in 1861 involves the French naval corvette Electon. They were sailing off the coast of Tenerife in the Canary Islands when they encountered a massive, sick, or dying giant squid floating at the surface.
Ooh, so one of those floating islands again?
Exactly. But unlike previous mariners who might have fled, the crew of the Electon actively engaged it. They fired musket volleys into its body and attempted to harpoon it to haul it aboard for study.
They actually shot at it.
They did. They actually managed to get a heavy rope slip knot around the creature's tail section. But the animal was so extraordinarily heavy, and its ammonia-soaked flesh so soft and gelatinous, that as they heaved, the rope sliced right through the body.
Ugh, it just cut right through.
They only managed to haul a small, fleshy piece of the tail fin aboard before the rest of the massive creature sank into the depths.
But the crucial thing is that the ship's commander wrote a formal, detailed report to the French Academy of Sciences, and an artist aboard made a sketch of the encounter.
That sketch is very famous.
And that specific event, that sketch, directly inspired Jules Verne when he wrote the giant squid attack scene in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, almost a decade later.
It was the exact moment the Kraken formally transitioned from maritime folklore into the realm of recorded natural history and subsequently into modern science fiction.
That is just so cool.
But the definitive, undeniable proof, the moment the scientific community could no longer scoff, came a decade later in North America.
This is my absolute favorite story from the research. 1873, Conception Bay, Newfoundland. 2 fishermen, Theophilus Picot and Daniel Squires, along with a 12-year-old boy named Tom, are out fishing in a tiny open wooden dory.
A very small boat for this encounter.
A tiny boat. They see a large mass floating in the water. Thinking it's valuable debris or part of a wreck, they poke it with a boat hook.
A nearly fatal mistake.
A huge mistake. The mass instantly springs to life. It's a living giant squid. It rears up, strikes the side of the wooden boat with its massive beak, and violently throws 2 huge tentacles over the dory, threatening to capsize it and drag the whole thing under.
terrifying.
The two adult fishermen are absolutely paralyzed with terror. They literally drop their oars. But young Tom, the 12-year-old, grabs a small hatchet from the bottom of the boat and just starts hacking frantically at the thick tentacle draped over the gunnel. He physically chops it off. The squid releases a massive cloud of black ink and disappears into the deep.
And they rowed back to shore terrified, but carrying a severed 19-foot piece of tentacle in the bottom of their boat as undeniable physical proof.
And this is where the story gets even better. Reverend Moses Harvey enters the picture. He's an amateur naturalist living in Newfoundland, and he is obsessed with sea life. He buys the severed tentacle from the fisherman for $10.
Which was a lot of money back then.
A solid payout for Tom. But it gets better. A few weeks later, lightning strikes twice. Some other local fishermen accidentally catch a fully intact, dead giant squid that had gotten tangled in their herring net.
Just incredibly lucky timing.
Right. Harvey immediately buys that entire carcass too. And because he is an amateur and doesn't have a massive biological laboratory, he literally drags it into his house and drapes the massive 27-foot-long dead giant squid across his own bathroom tub.
Can you imagine his neighbors?
And he hires a local photographer to take a picture of it.
That photograph of the giant squid draped over the bathtub remains one of the most iconic images in the history of marine biology.
It really is.
It was the undeniable, physical, photographic proof the global scientific community needed. The Kraken was officially real, categorized, and named Architeuthis ducks.
So the 19th century proves they exist. We have the bodies. But it is crazy to think about how long it took us, with all our technology, to actually see one alive in its natural habitat. Fast forward to the modern era. Why was it so hard to just go down there and look at them?
Despite having access to dead carcasses washing ashore, observing a live giant squid in the deep ocean remained one of the greatest technical challenges in marine biology for over a century.
Because they live so deep.
They live at extreme depths, typically between 600 to over 1,200 meters. The hydrostatic pressure down there is crushing, and there is absolutely zero ambient sunlight.
So how did we try to look for them?
Well, traditional deep-sea submersibles were incredibly loud with whining thrusters, and they relied on intensely bright, blinding halogen lights to see.
Oh, I see the problem.
Yes. These noisy, bright machines simply scared the highly sensitive animals away long before the cameras could spot them. It wasn't until 2004 that a major technical and biological breakthrough occurred.
2004? Think about that. We put a rover on Mars before we got a picture of a live giant squid on Earth. How did they finally do it?
Two brilliant Japanese researchers, Tsunemi Kubadera and Kyuichi Mori, spent 2 years rethinking the approach. They figured out that instead of blindly hunting the vast ocean for the squid, they should track the predators that feed on them.
The sperm whales.
Exactly. They located a known sperm whale hunting ground off the Ogasawara Islands. They deployed a 900-meter vertical line baited with smaller squid and mashed shrimp. Crucially, they equipped it with an automated digital camera and a strobe flash, not a continuous bright light.
And their patience paid off. An 8-meter giant squid attacked the bait line, got its tentacles snagged on the hooks, and the automated camera took over 500 high-resolution photos over 4 hours as the massive squid struggled.
It eventually broke free, leaving a piece of its tentacle behind, but they had the photos.
Those were the first ever photographs of a live giant squid in its natural deep-sea habitat. And the images revealed something incredibly surprising to the scientific community. The squid was highly aggressive and dynamic.
Yes, that surprised a lot of people.
It did not just drift lazily like a jellyfish, as some scientists had hypothesized. It actively and violently attacked the bait, wrapping it in a tight ball of tentacles.
And then the Holy Grail happened in 2012. We finally got high-definition video footage.
Oh, that video is incredible.
A team used a specially designed, completely silent submersible. Instead of bright white lights, they used red lights, which deep-sea animals mostly cannot see, and they deployed a bioluminescent lure that mimicked the exact flashing pattern of a panicking depth-sea jellyfish.
That was clever.
And out of the total darkness, this massive silver-gold creature just glides into view, its eye reflecting the faint light.
That footage changed our perception entirely. Seeing the animal move gracefully and powerfully in its own extreme environment stripped away centuries of the monster myth. It replaced the terror of the Kraken with a profound sense of biological wonder.
We also made incredible strides with the colossal squid around the same time.
Oh, right, the colossal squid.
In 2007, a New Zealand fishing vessel operating in the freezing Ross Sea accidentally hauled up a live fully intact colossal squid that had attacked a toothfish caught on their deep long line.
That was the nearly half-ton specimen with the swiveling hooks we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
But it did not survive, right?
No, it did not. Sadly, these deep-sea animals almost never survive the journey to the surface. And this brings us to a vital ecological reality about these creatures that completely inverts the myth. For all their fearsome reputation as ship-crushing monsters, they are incredibly fragile in our world.
Why is that? What actually happens to them when they come up?
They are biologically tuned to survive under extreme pressure and freezing temperatures. If they are brought to the surface quickly, whether caught on a line or pushed up by changing ocean currents, the sudden drop in environmental pressure causes the dissolved gases in their blood and muscle tissues to rapidly expand and form bubbles.
Oh, no.
They essentially suffer from a catastrophic case of severe decompression sickness, commonly known to human divers as the bends.
That is awful.
Furthermore, the rapid increase in temperature as they hit the surface water violently shocks their nervous systems. This is precisely why almost every giant squid ever seen by an early sailor at the surface was already dying, lethargic, or dead.
So the terrifying Kraken, the beast capable of crushing massive galleons in its tentacles, is actually a highly delicate, specialized organism perfectly tuned to a very specific, extreme environment. The moment it leaves that dark environment, it is destroyed by the very air and pressure we need to survive.
Exactly. They are undisputed apex predators in the Twilight Zone, but they are victims of their own specialized biology the moment they are pulled into the human world.
Wow. So what does this all mean? We have covered so much ground here. Let's zoom out and summarize this incredible journey for everyone listening.
We have essentially traced the evolution of a human idea. It began with terrified, malnourished, and sleep-deprived sailors staring out into the dark. Their brains were desperately trying to make sense of rare, confusing glimpses of dying, 40-foot cephalopods, all mixed together with complex optical illusions like the Fata Morgana.
And then those hallucinated, terrifying stories were grabbed by cartographers and religious politicians like Olaus Magnus. They drew these monsters onto massive maps, not just to warn ships, but to flex their cultural muscles, to impress the Pope, and to symbolize the chaotic power of nature and political upheaval.
Until finally, the physical evidence became too massive to ignore. Beaks in whale stomachs, scars on flesh, and 27-foot bodies draped across bathtubs forced the scientific community to catch up.
Which is such a funny image.
It really is. The myth was methodically dismantled by whalers, amateur naturalists, and eventually replaced by the stunning silver-gold reality captured by silent, deep-sea submersibles.
The Kraken was never just a lie. It was a perfect storm of rare, extreme biology, the fragility of human psychology under intense stress, and the absolute paralyzing terror of the unknown ocean.
And that leaves you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to ponder.
I like a good thought to end on.
Today, there is a massive international scientific initiative called the Seabed 2030 Project. Its ambitious goal is to map 100% of the entire global ocean floor using advanced sonar by the year 2030. Currently, only about 20% of the ocean is mapped to modern, high-resolution standards.
That statistic is still wild to me. We genuinely have better, more detailed maps of the surface of Mars than we do of our own ocean floor.
We do. But as we push relentlessly toward that 2030 goal, a fascinating philosophical question arises. What happens to the human imagination when there are no more blank spaces left on the map?
That is a great question.
When the ocean is fully illuminated by sonar, satellites, and deep-sea cameras, will we lose our innate capacity for myth? Or as we have seen with the bizarre realities of abyssal gigantism, swiveling hooks, and ammonia-filled bodies, will we find that the actual biological reality down there is somehow stranger, infinitely more complex, and more awe-inspiring than the monsters we invented to cope with the dark?
Oh, I love that thought. When the lights finally come on in the deep, the monsters do not actually disappear. They just become real. And maybe the next time you look out at the dark rolling ocean at night, you will remember that 18th century sailor shivering on the wooden deck. And you will realize that the true magic of the sea isn't in the terrifying myths we project onto it, but in the incredibly bizarre alien realities hiding just a few thousand feet beneath the surface. Big shout out to all who's supporting GL Deep Dives. You guys are incredible. If you're enjoying the journey, make sure to follow and subscribe. We've got a lot more coming your way. Let's keep growing together.